for it. I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it, discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it, uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know, there'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's play. I can make magic today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Senior Nation. I'm your host, Phyllis, Ayman, and you are listening to the SORC TVRadio Network, WTSN, Washington, D.C. We are indeed a senior nation with 100 plus million adults over the age of 50. And we are here to bring you up-to-date information about successful aging, healthful longevity, and becoming what I call a well-ager to dignity, respect, quality of life, and quality of care for our parents, our grandparents, and loved ones. We at Senior Nation will be your trusted voice for informed choices, meaningful conversations, and a vibrant life at every age. Though the SORC TVRadio Network is known for its dedication to bringing the highest level of jazz content to the viewing and listening audience, the owners of the network are also dedicated to bringing this important content to this fast-growing demographic. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. And now for tonight's guest. It is only fitting that Mel Albin is my guest tonight on Senior Nation, because as of last week, Senior Nation just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the show. And Mel, as the owner and founder of the SORC TVRadio Network, saw the value in having a show on this topic. I'm thrilled to have him join me to discuss a topic of extreme concern for many people as they continue to age. But first, a little about Mel. I actually could go on and on about his accomplishments. Mel is the owner of MEA Holdings LLC, a multimedia enterprise that currently features the SORC TVRadio Network, shopblackenterprise.com, and the Black Businesses Matter liveaidconcert.com. Mel is CEO for the SORC TVRadio Network, one of the biggest adult music and talk show nonprofit, non-commercial internet broadcast stations on the East Coast, reaching an average monthly global audience nearly 3 million and over 38 million global viewers and listeners annually. He's produced award-winning streaming radio shows and was an artist manager for 2 decades. Mel has his own weekly live streaming show, the Jazz Confusion Power Hour, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Mel is also a partner in a company that provides world-class music festivals to small cities throughout the United States. Mel has also spent a good portion of his career in academia as a full-time undergraduate and graduate faculty member and program administrator at Adelphi University, Excelsior College, UMUC, now the University of Maryland Global Campus, and Strayer University. Mel served as executive director of the Executive MBA at UMUC and created and was the executive director for the graduate program, Center for Global Enterprise at McDaniel College. Founder of the Albin Company's Diversified Investment Advisors, renamed Transamerica Retirement Services, Mel holds a BA in Political Science, an MA in U.S. Economic and Business History, an MBA in Econometrics, Investment Portfolio Analysis, and a dual PhD in U.S. Business and Economic History and Neuropsychology. Mel is also a frequent contributor to the New York Times. He wrote about the 4-generation family back in the 1990s and has a keen interest in the dynamics and challenges of intergenerational relationships. We've had many conversations about how we care for and treat older adults as they advance in age. An important part of that conversation is the money people have for their retirement years, how they can make money last, and we will touch briefly on what happens if their care needs increase and how that figures into their retirement savings. So I'm thrilled to have Mel here with me tonight.
Hi, Phyllis.
Hey, Mel.
How are you
Happy
doing?
anniversary to me, or to
Yes,
you.
congratulations. And your show has done so well. You kept building it, and you get around 20,000 people to watch it every week. So the show's doing great.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think it's the topic. It's obviously relevant. I think it's the name. Really, we really are, as I say in the intro, a senior nation, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the over 65 population is supposed to overtake the under 18 population now by, I think it's 2030. So we really indeed are a senior nation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should mention that, because that is one of the big problems we have. The boomer generation is pretty much retired at this point, and the problem is that generation Y and Z are much smaller populations, so they're going to be putting in less money into the Social Security system, and that means how do people who are boomers get paid? And that's one of the crises I want to talk about tonight, that by 2030, 2032, the Social Security fund may be insolvent. So there are simple fixes for that the government can make, but they have to be willing to do what they've done in the past, which is to redistribute wealth.
Right.
And they've always, that's the purpose of taxation, and they have to really think about that. But what I want to talk about tonight is what I'm going to just label the fragility crisis, and that incorporates, how do people even get to retirement? And when they retire, how do they make sure that they'll have an income that will be somewhat similar to the income they had during their working years, and make sure that it'll last throughout their lifetime? And that's some of the things we're going to talk about. I want to talk about the persistent inflation and the cost of living that has been eroding people's incomes, and obviously it's a real problem for people on fixed income in retirement.
Right.
Market volatility and asset erosion. We saw one period where we had housing deflation, and we had the subprime mortgage crisis in the first decade of the 21st century. And also we've seen the volatility in the stock market between 2021 and 2024, where that volatility literally wiped out any gains that were made over the past 4 years during that period. So, then you have surging healthcare costs. You have Social Security, as I mentioned, insolvency. You have the risk of longer life expectancy. People are living longer.
Absolutely.
And
so
then we have.
I just want to, can I just make a comment about something you said? And I'm sure you're going to get to it, but it's just, especially now, rising prices and with these tariffs, the cost of groceries, the cost of, gas, everything going up. I mean, I'm sure you're going to address this, but it becomes more of a serious issue, especially for people on fixed incomes.
Absolutely. And that's why you have to do really careful planning. And in the housing market, this is one of the biggest problems. People talk about gasoline and food, and obviously those have been inflationary and hurt people's pocketbooks because their incomes aren't growing as fast as the cost of living. So it's a problem. But the real problem, the bigger problem, is housing. When I bought my first townhouse, when I was married initially, I paid $28,000 for my townhouse.
Mm-hmm.
That townhouse today, I know, is $800,000.
I was just going to say, this has to be above $500,000. I was just intuitively, right.
So I'm thinking, I bought it when I was 23 or 24 with my wife. Today, if you're 23 and 24, how in the world do you afford $800,000? And this is the problem. So you have to have housing. So you buy the house. You do build equity. But the problem is when you're paying this big mortgage, how do you put money away for retirement at the same
Right.
time? And that is really an issue, and it's caused unretirement. It's caused people who normally would have retired between 55 and 65. Now they're working till they're 75 because they just can't afford to retire. So, or they retire and unretire. They retire and
Right.
yeah,
I was just going to say that they retire from their position where they maybe get their pension or, Social Security, and then they unretire. I think we touched on this, just briefly in a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and they go back to work. And some of it is really just to have a sense of purpose and connection with people. But another important part of it really is people who like you said, they don't have a sufficient income to survive. They need something, but even if it's something, minimal, but they need that money, whether it's for medical bills or medication or groceries, whatever it is, they just can't make it on whatever the retirement was, based on just what you said, their 401k or, their Social Security. They just can't make it.
No, and there's another problem that we're seeing that is happening so rapidly. We've never seen anything like this before. The AI revolution are eliminating the kinds of jobs that unretirees might go back to that are not the highest paying jobs, but provide steady supplemental income. And those jobs are disappearing so quickly that, it really presents another kind of problem too. Long-term care. 70% of adults over 65 will eventually need long-term care, but it's not covered by Medicare.
Correct.
So
people don't know that. By the way, people don't really know that it's not covered by Medicare, Medicare A or B. They really don't know that unless they have long-term care insurance. I mean, it will cover, a short-term rehab stay, or
right.
will cover a hospital stay, but beyond that, it doesn't cover those expenses.
Most retirees, 60% of them, I say most, 60% approximately, they don't have enough money to have even 2 years of in-home support, let alone go to assisted living or a nursing home facility.
Right.
So, this is a crisis, and Medicare premiums keep going up. That's another problem we face, daily. So, look, I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but the reality is, Phyllis, that these are serious issues, and the solutions are narrowing. There used to be more options, but the solutions are narrowing now.
Absolutely.
So Social Security is anticipating between 2033 and 2033 and 2034, a 23% cut in benefits. That's what they're anticipating, based on the way Social Security is structured today.
Wow.
Tax rates by 2026, tax rates could go up 3%, possibly. 80% of households with older adults are financially struggling or at risk. We're not just talking about a small group of people anymore. We're talking about majorities of people planning for retirement, on the verge of retirement, or have retired and have to unretire because they never had enough money set aside for retirement. And it's not just their fault. You and I were talking before the show started. Up until the 1970s, most companies, you worked for IBM, General Motors, Xerox, Kodak, they had what was called defined benefit pensions. Right. And they would give you approximately 60% of your final pay, coupled with your Social Security. You'd be close to 80% of your final pay. And it was guaranteed. Well, something happened in the late 60s. Studebaker decided, even though they had all these retired employees, they decided, we're not giving them the pension we promised them. And the way they avoided it is they moved to Canada. And there was a senator from New York, Jacob Javits, who looked at this and said, we got to fix this. And they created ERISA in 1974, the Employment Insurance Retirement Act, which said that pensions now are paid for by the employee. It can be an employer match. They don't have to.
Right.
It can't be a voluntary employer match. But now you are responsible for not only saving and putting away part of your pay, but investing it. When the first 401k started, there were only three funds: a money market,
Right.
high grade stock fund, and a high grade bond fund. You had three choices.
Right.
Now you have the whole world as your
World.
oyster.
Right.
And whoever taught us how to invest and to minimize risk to maximize return. So, when you look at the whole picture, no one's prepared by training in most cases. No one's prepared to manage and be able to calculate their needs in retirement. No one has told people how important it is to have a long-term care policy, and most employers do not provide that. Medicare doesn't cover it. So,
Correct.
a person today is overwhelmed with the amount of decisions they have to make. Even if they have the resources, it's overwhelming. And for
Listen,
many people,
I just want to interject something, if you don't mind. But just today, so I'm, in my role as a speech and language pathologist in a small long-term care, short-term rehab facility in upstate New York. And just today we had a meeting with someone, and it's just exactly what you said. The man, unexpectedly, of course, had a stroke. And, we had this meeting for him to prepare to go home. And, his wife was on the phone. She couldn't make it in for the meeting. And they were talking about the fact that actually his Medicare benefits have run out. They don't qualify for Medicaid because they have too much income. So for the remainder of his stay, he's going to have to be private pay. They don't have the funds for that. Plus the help he's going to need at home. So now Medicare is not going to pay for some of that, right? Because they won't pay for that. And he needs some help at home. And so how are they going to manage? I mean, the wife can't really take care of him. So they said, well, they'll see what they can do. Now, I've been in situations before where, especially if it comes towards the end of someone's stay, the facility has a fund and they can help with that a little bit. But it's a classic example. It's exactly what you said. What you're talking about. I just had that experience with this lovely gentleman today with his wife. They're saying, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and that's not a unique situation by any means.
No, not at all.
And that's the real problem. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some very important changes in catch-up provisions on 401k plans. The Secure 2.0 Act, which was part of the big, beautiful tax bill that Congress passed, they put in what's called a super catch-up provision. Right now, and it's been this way before, if you're between ages 50 and 59, or you're over 64. So between 59 and 64, it doesn't apply, but between 50 and 59, or you're over age 64. You can put in $11,250 above the 401k maximum contribution level as a catch-up provision.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong. 8,000, not 11,000. Okay. 8,000. Now, if you're between 60 and 63, that gap I said, between 59 and 64, you can put in $11,250 additional. But here's the problem. If you need to do that, that means you don't have enough money to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So you're not gaining ground, you're making up ground. So the catch-up provisions are okay, but then there's a third part of this that creates a real problem. If your income exceeds $150,000, the IRS now requires all of your 401k or 403b catch-up provisions go into a Roth IRA. You can't put it into your 401k pre-tax. The new provisions started this year. It must go into Roth after tax. So the catch-up provisions can't even go into your 401k where a lot of the funds are no load funds. They have no charges, you
Correct.
know, and you can't put it in pre-tax. Now in the Roth, you can take it out tax free,
Right.
but but now you got to put it in after tax, which doesn't allow you to actually recover part of that investment through tax return. And it becomes harder now for people to even do the catch-up provision because it's after-tax dollars. So, so the legislative changes through inflation, changes in the housing market, all of these things have kind of conspired to make retirement, a dream. It's not even, people don't even know how they can approach this or make it work anymore. Now, only the super wealthy, don't have a problem with that. And, another problem with Social Security, once your income goes over $220,000, you don't have to pay into the Social Security fund anymore. That's a problem. If you're making 220,000, even though the amount that you put in, once you get to those high income levels, the amount you put into Social Security, if there wasn't a cap, you'll never be able to recover it based on the income you need. So they say it's an unfair tax on the very wealthy, but so is progressive income tax, but they have to pay that. So this is a moral, it's an ethical issue about how do we treat people who work their whole lives and can't seem to find the means to retire, not comfortably, adequately.
So let me ask you this question. So what do you think the reasoning is behind some of this? Because my feeling is that, especially with the thinking that older people are draining the government coffers, and that Medicare, they constantly want to cut Medicare and Medicaid, which would be even worse for the older population, right? To survive. Then what do you see as what the motivation is for some?
See, here's the problem. When Social Security started in 1935 actually, when it started, you had so many more people working than were retiring.
Right.
Now you have a problem with so many people retired and fewer people working.
Right.
So the problem is, how do you address that? And one way is you can do the callous thing and cut benefits when they're already inadequate to begin with. And the other way is to say, this isn't a free market. We have to get out of this idea that it's a free market. Whatever you make is yours. It's, I don't want to get into a political discussion, but it's like the Second Amendment. It was never meant to cover people's private ownership of weapons. It was a public right to join a militia. So, so we have to rethink the notion of kind of laissez-faire. At some point, people make a lot of money, have a right to that money. They wouldn't be making that money if they didn't live in a society in which all these people work in labor in order for them to have that money. So, it's a moral issue, Phyllis. And are we ever going to? We got beyond it in 1935 because there was a depression. So, no one's going to say, well, all the people who are retiring should die and not have any money. It was a depression going on. Well, now we talk about a post-affluent society, a society that's driven by AI and the promise of people not having to work as much anymore. And so we have all these other kinds of thoughts that in some ways restrict us from looking at the problem and saying, take the cap off, Social Security for people that are wealthy. No matter how much they make, they got to keep paying in. It's not going to hurt them. They'll have milk on the table, So, but it's the will of the nation to come to grips with this issue, and I'm not very optimistic about that.
Well, me neither. And actually, I'm not very optimistic because, like you just said, and like I said in the intro, it's how we care for, treat, and value older people. And a lot of this, from my perspective, especially what I see every day, is that we're not doing that. And so, therefore, it isn't an important issue for some people on some aspect of the political spectrum, I don't even know if that's the right terminology to address, because they're just not valuing older people. They just see them as a drain on society. I have said for many years, we're increasing the lifespan, and we're doing research about, reversing aging. I don't really like that term so much, but, people living into their 90s, 100, but if they don't have a value, if they don't have a purpose, if they're not going to be able to be sustained in a meaningful way, what's the point of living that long?
Phyllis, I've come to look at this a little differently than that. It's not that we don't value older people. We don't value work. If we valued work appropriately, you wouldn't have to be a person who's in retirement now after 40, 50 years of work and struggling. The fact that we don't value work is why we turn to older people and say, you're draining us. They paid 50 years they've worked and paid in to a system. In addition to that, they provided the wealth through consumerism that drives our nation. And so to me, when we talk about aging, we don't value people that get beyond a certain year. It's the value of work that's the problem. If we valued work appropriately, we wouldn't have to be thinking about these people are draining us. They contributed to our national economy for 50 years. So to me, it's kind of a chicken egg question. Why do we devalue people that are older? Because we don't value work when they were younger.
So let me ask you this question. What do you think with the advent and the proliferation of AI, what impact do you think that's going to have?
Well, when it comes to AI, okay, every industrial revolution, when we went from the cottage system to the factory system, when we went from industrialization to providing a service economy, every time it increased jobs. AI is the first major industrial revolution that decreases jobs. So then you have another problem. Do we start a guaranteed annual wage where people that are below a certain level, the government pays them not to work? I mean, what are you going to do with a population when jobs are being cut? And the people that that really want to push AI say, oh, it's not a problem. We're creating all these new jobs anyway, and people that code, people that create. But the reality is, over the short run, which is 10, 20, 30 years, companies are announcing all entry-level jobs are being cut. Even executive jobs are being threatened. So, it's not simply, well, this will pass. No, we're talking about a generation or two that it's going to immediately impact. Now, beyond that, who knows what's going to happen? But, like I said, I'm not optimistic. And that's why I came prepared tonight to talk to your audience about, okay, given this morass, what do you do? How do you plan? And, I created a slide where I wanted to tell people between 35 and 50, if you do this right, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but you can't do it yourself. Most people absolutely need to find a financial planner, not a stockbroker, a financial planner that may charge a fee, or they may not. But whether they charge a fee or not doesn't determine their acumen in helping you go to plan for retirement. But you need somebody, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a CFP, a CHFC, financial analyst. It doesn't really make a difference, but you need to have somebody in your corner, and you need to interview them.
I needed to have you like 20 years ago, Mel. Mel, you're 20 years too late for me. I don't know.
Well, I'm a case of the shoemaker's son has no shoes, because I did it for everybody else. I didn't do a very good job for myself, unfortunately, but I just want to show people and talk a little bit about, what do you do between 35 and 55 to be able to plan for retirement? So I created this slide.
I have to put on my glasses to see this. Okay.
let me explain in
Yeah,
general
please do.
what this tells everybody. What this tells everybody, it's based on math. And most people are not that good at math. And that's why you need somebody who can help you to do these calculations. So, what is your goal when you retire? Well, you want to replace at least 80% of final pay. That includes your Social Security, your assets you've saved and invested. It may be the equity in your home, and there are reverse mortgages. There are ways you can tap that equity. But the reality is, you need to be able to have 80% of your final pay. Now, we're going to talk about how long that needs to last. But first, we have to calculate what's the number, how long does it have to last, and when we look at these income streams, we can back it into an aggregate amount of capital that you need. Once you know that aggregate amount of capital, then you have to look at when do I want to retire. That's that'll make a difference in the aggregate amount of capital. If you retire at 55, you're going to need a lot more money than if you retire at 70. So you have to determine when do you want to retire. And then you have to look at the aggregate amount of capital that you need in order to replace 80% of your income. And that includes Social Security and any assets you have that you convert to income. And the last piece of that, most important, is how long does it need to last? It's a real problem because males live to be 77 and females now live to be 81. So males need to plan their income not for the average 77. What if you live past the average? You want to die broke?
Right.
Or die because you're broke? So males need to plan to at least age 80 to 82, and females need to plan to at least age 85 to 87. That's how long they have to plan their incomes to last. So once you know the amount of years you need to have 80% of your income plus your Social Security, and you know the aggregate amount of capital you need, then you have to go back and look at how much do I have now if I'm 35 to 50, how much do I put away from my retirement, how much capital do I have of this amount? And then the difference is what you need to fund. And that becomes the problem. The problem is you may not, if you waited too long, even if you max out your 401k, it may not produce enough income with Social Security to replace 80% of your final pay.
So I just want to, a thought just came to me based on what you said, because as we know that a lot of people, when they get to 50, 55, 60, because of the drain, or I should say, because of the difficulties that younger people are having finding jobs and having a sustainable income, many older people are finding that they're borrowing from their 401k to help their children buy their house, or help with the grandchildren, or whatever that is, which is another drain on their 401k, their retirement savings, that they probably didn't anticipate.
Well, it's a double whammy. First of all, you're taking away the capital, so that money's not growing at all. Second of all, you have to pay back the loan. If you're paying back the loan, how do I keep making my contributions? Can I do both? And probably not. So if you don't pay it back, there's a huge penalty. So it's a very complicated decision. And people say, of course, I want to help my children, but then I have a question: are your children going to help you?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, unfortunately, we know the answer.
Unfortunately, some do. A lot don't.
Right? Well, a lot of them can't. It's not
a lot can't, but a lot also don't.
Yeah. So this is the problem.
And wait. Excuse me. I just want to interject something. I'm sorry, but I had somebody on the show several months ago, and we talked about this, about solo agers. What about people who don't have children? I had another meeting today with someone. She has no family. She was living with her brother. Her brother passed away. She was never married. She has no children. She has a friend who lives hundreds of miles away, who is her healthcare proxy. But beyond that, that person can't really do anything for her. And she's in this situation of going home and needs help. And she doesn't have the resources, and she doesn't have anybody other than this one person who can really help her.
Well, the other side of
So
this,
what do
Phyllis,
those
is
people do?
but the other side of this is I'm in that. I never had children, so I never had. I've raised stepchildren. I pay for them to go to school and all that kind of stuff. But I don't have children where they're going to come to me and say, I need to get a house. I need some money. So in one sense, I have less cost. So and so it's not necessarily a bad thing to be a solo ager because you have less cost. You don't have grandchildren. You don't have to set
Correct.
aside money for their college. You don't have to help them buy a home. So there are less costs associated with it. But my concern is really this, and this is where I'm getting to. It's important to do this calculation because once you know the aggregate amount of capital you need, and you know the time horizon for investing from your current age until the age you chose to retire at, when you're eligible for Social Security, whether you take it at 62 or wait to 67 and a half, once you make these decisions, then it becomes a mathematical formula. How much do I need to keep putting in? And what rate of return do I need to get me there? Now, we've always been told that when you're young, you can afford to take risk. When you get older, you take less risk. Well,
Right.
if I'm 55 and I only have $10 set aside for retirement, my risk of being impoverished is a lot greater than my risk of the market.
Right. Right.
So maybe I do need to get a 15% return and take that risk because otherwise I'm going to have nothing in retirement. So, it's a myth that, as you age, you should become more conservative in your investing. It has to do with how do I get there and what do I have to do to get there? Now, let's suppose somebody says, well, I don't want to take a 10% investment risk. Well, fine, then put in more money.
Right.
I mean, you can balance this off somewhat, but the reality is if the numbers don't work, you are not going to get there. So once you know the aggregate amount of capital, the year in which you want to retire, the assets you already have put away, what your Social Security calculation is going to be, the years and how long you need the income to last, then you just solve for rate of return and contribution. And so your investment return isn't based on am I conservative, am I aggressive? It has nothing to do with that. It's a mathematical formula between how much you're going to put in, what the gap is, and what you need as a return. So we have to get rid of all that.
Yeah, but what about, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm just thinking as you're talking, things come up, medical expenses come up, emergencies come up that people didn't plan for, and then they can't continue to make contributions. I mean, and they come up at any age. I know people think that these things occur more as you get older. It's not a foregone conclusion. That also depends on choices people make and lifestyle and whatever. But things happen to younger people too. I mean, it's just a reality, right?
Look, there's always a random factor, but one of the other things you need to do, and again, this is has a lot to do with discipline. Do I take my annual vacation? Do I put 20% of my money away in savings every year for the unanticipated problems that you are referring to that might hit? You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say I'm going to go to Europe 3 times, take the whole family, and then you have no long-term care. You have no savings. If you lose your job, what do you do? So there's trade-offs, and people have to be educated about what the trade-offs represent in terms of their well-being. Of course, it's nice to get away and take a vacation 2 or 3 times a year. It's great. But if that means that you're not going to have any long-term care, if you're not going to be able to afford, a decent lifestyle in retirement, which is more important to you? Now, if it's more important to take the vacations and take the risk, knock yourself out. I mean, you can't tell people what to do, but they need to understand the trade-offs. And most people don't understand the trade-offs really well. And that's why I'm trying to present here.
What's the name of the book? I think I just remembered, The Richest Man in Babylon, which says that you should always put away, I think, 20% of what you bring in, put away 20%, put it on the side. And that's how you will help to build your wealth, your nest egg, whatever you want to call it.
Well, the 20% that I'm looking at is in addition to your contributions to your 401k. It's in addition to it because you need to have a cash fund Look, if you're going to only depend on your 401k and you lose your job, you got to take the money out. There goes your retirement. So, it's a, Phyllis, it takes a lot of discipline that most people don't have. And it's not a matter of me criticizing people. You have choices, and you have children, and you have aging parents, and you have,
Right.
a host of issues. So I'm not saying abandon everybody. I'm just saying be aware of the choices. If you have, for example, a daughter, I'm just making this up, and she wants to start a hair salon, there are loans for that. And you shouldn't be the source of that money because, yeah, she might have the hair salon. It might fail. And in the interim, you just raided your 401k plan and diminished your retirement.
Right.
So,
Right.
so these are choices people have to make, and they have to look at alternatives. You know, it's not easy. And that's why I wanted to present this, that most people don't even know what I'm trying to show them tonight. And they don't really understand the risks. If people really understood all these risks, if you thought about the fact you might have an accident with your car, you wouldn't even go down the road or drive. You wouldn't even get up in the morning. Like, why bother? You know,
Exactly.
if you we call them accidents. Well, accidents mean they're random. You're not
Right.
you're not excluded from the randomness. But if you focus on the randomness, you never get in your car.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
so it's the same thing here. If you don't focus on what you need to do to avoid the randomness, just like driving your car, if you should be doing this because this is the same thing. You're driving your retirement. And if you want to abdicate that responsibility in the sense and say, well, my pleasure today is more important than my retirement tomorrow, that's your choice.
Well,
And
listen, my father used to say you can't take it with you. And
yep.
we, he was an accountant, so he certainly knew the numbers. That doesn't mean he knew about investments or anything like that. But his philosophy was you can't take it with you. And, we were a middle class family and, lived fairly, nicely. We went to the theater. We went on vacations. We went out to dinner. We traveled, we did that contributed to my, my experiences and, everything that I bring to the table. Right. However, because of that, he really, he's probably, and of course, this was many, many years ago, and he died suddenly when I was 17. Actually, yesterday would have been his birthday, but and it made me think about that and this show because he didn't put anything away. We lived nicely, but when he died, that was it. I mean, that was
Mhm.
absolutely it. My mother had to go back to work. I was finishing my first year of college. There was nothing, zero, zippo. That wasn't great.
No, and part of the problem is too, you know, for for a lot of baby boomers, if and this starting in the mid 1980s, it became recognized that there was what was called the empty nest syndrome. Women
Right.
that got into their 40s and 50s, their children were now college age. They were leaving and going off to college, and so they went back to school and to become, to get a degree. But all those years up until that point, they weren't contributing to Social Security.
Right. Right.
So their only benefit would be half of your spouse's Social Security when they decease. So, you know, so right away for 30 years, you only have half even the Social Security if your spouse predeceases you. That you would, so I mean,
Right.
there are all these issues that that are generational. Now, I don't think it's going to impact women who are now Gen Y and Gen Z because I don't think they're going to stay home and be empty and ever be empty nesters because they're not even having children. The
A lot are
population is
not.
going
Correct.
down. Yes. So
Correct.
so these problems are generational. These problems have to do with income levels. taxation levels, if you make $100,000 now a year, which sounds like a lot before, but these days it's not that much. So
Correct.
if you have a household income, married filing jointly, of $100,000, your tax rate is 25%.
Right.
So that means a quarter of that's 75,000 right off the bat that you have as net income. If you have a house, you can deduct mortgage interest. But remember, you're only deducting the mortgage interest. You're not deducting the mortgage. So,
Right.
so when you start to look at the amount of money that people have to pay out of their pocket for taxes, how much is left to really contribute adequately to an IRA, a Roth IRA, or a 401k, or a 403b?
Not
There's
much.
not a lot. No. And so it's a problem. And that's why I'm trying to give people this formula. You need to at least have some idea of what you need to get to 80% of retirement income to last at least until you're aged 82 to 85. And if you don't do these calculations, you won't know. If you do them, you might know, and then you might say, well, now I know, but I still can't do it.
Right.
And,
Right.
but this is critical now. This is critical. And when the things I've explained about Social Security in 2032, unless they change how Social Security is funded, there's a much smaller population funding it and a lot bigger population taking money out of it. So, Social Security, which used to be at least some form of guarantee, is no longer even guaranteed.
Well, that's true. And like you said, there will be less people in the workplace to contribute. So there will be, fewer people contributing to Social Security. But you said something else earlier about, jobs and programmers and this and that. But those are basically entry-level jobs that will most likely be taken by people at the younger age of the spectrum. Certainly not older people, and all, for the most part.
It's not even clear to me, and I do look at the data. It's not even clear to me how many new AI jobs are being created versus how many entry-level jobs are being lost because of AI. It's still not clear to me. And I think there's a net loss. The AI advocates say there'll be a net gain. I don't see it.
I don't see it
how.
either. I don't see it either.
Yeah, and it may be an age issue. Maybe I'm missing something, that maybe younger people see that I don't see. But, to me, it sounds contradictory. I was just reading that I think it was 60% of all college students who are freshmen now are choosing a degree that's related to AI.
AI. I read the same article. Right.
Yeah, and here's the irony. They're getting trained in a job that's going to eliminate their jobs.
Right. I know you were going to say that, right? Which is kind of an oxymoron, right?
It is. So, unless I'm missing something, I don't see where these jobs that are entry level are going to come from, because they're eliminating them. Robotics are eliminating assembly line workers,
right.
so quickly. I mean, so quickly. And here's the problem. Who's going to buy all this stuff that's being produced?
Correct.
That leads to, very serious issues with our economy.
Correct.
So, I feel badly, having to come to your show and sound like I'm the curmudgeon, telling people that everybody is in trouble. But I'm trying to post a warning, a sign that says, just take a look at this. Look at what I'm explaining to you. Get somebody who's really good at this to help you look at the numbers, and then make a decision what you want to do with your life. You don't have to do this, but then you're really playing, roulette. So
I just wanted to make a comment, and not to go back, because that was a great summing up statement. But even when we just touched on briefly people, unretiring, right? And a lot of the jobs that they go back to in the workforce, and like I said, some of them are just for the income, and some are just to have a connection with people. But I'm not, and whether it's a cashier in a grocery store, or at Home Depot, because they have an expertise or whatever. But a lot of those jobs are being taken over by automation. Just think about all the self-checkout lines in every store you go to, right? and more people are doing that because it seems, quicker. And then they're hiring less people as cashiers because more people are using the self-checkout lines, right? So I'm just saying that even that, those jobs that many people go back to, whether it's to augment their income or just to have a connection with people, even those jobs, are being reduced.
Well, you can see it all over,
Right.
like for example, Amazon is talking about not having anyone work in their warehouses. It'll
I
be
know, that's
totally automated, and robots. And robots they don't have sick leave. You don't have to pay for sick leave. You don't have to pay them for vacation time. So it sounds great, but then who's going to buy the Amazon products if nobody's working?
Right, correct.
No one's explaining this to me in a way that makes any sense. So, like I said, I may be missing something, but there seems to be, a bifurcation between the desire to reduce costs and take away jobs that are very meaningless to people, which they may be. But again, where is the consumer society going to end up?
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
And we're seeing some of it now, Phyllis. The very wealthy are driving the consumer society now. They're massive buyers of everything, but it used to be more evenly distributed in terms of who the consumer was and what they were buying, and it's not that way anymore. The top income levels are driving the consumer society. That's a real problem, and like I said, it's really the value of work, and that's what centers everything. If we devalue work, we devalue people's jobs, and we devalue them when they don't work and they retire after years of
I
work.
agree, 150%.
So, and this is, when people say, well, socialism's never worked. People don't understand socialism, for example. Socialism is the left wing of liberalism. All it says is that if we have a society that generates lots of wealth, and the people that are generating the wealth are people that are working, then we have to value them and make sure that they get a fair share of the pie. And that's what socialism is. It says we're gonna try to control, things like people being defrauded by banks, high bank rates on interest, credit card interest rates. They have to be. You can't be usurious, although that's changed and they are usurious these days.
Right.
But the question of socialism is not to take away people's incentive. It's to say that part of your incentive is other people.
Right.
And that's what we lose sight of. It's other people. And I don't know what the solution is anymore. And we were moving in a direction of more of collectivism in the 1960s. And then by the time we get to Ronald Reagan, once again, say no to drugs, like an individual decision.
Right.
It's not a collective problem. And that's where we are today. We've gotten worse, not better. We've gutted. Things that are important to really control the excesses of any economy. One of the problems of capitalism, and again, I'm not being anti-capitalist. I think it's the only viable system that makes any sense, but it has to be rationalized to some extent. The problem of capitalism is money tends to accrue in fewer and fewer hands, and we keep seeing this.
Correct, especially now. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the problem is then how do you redistribute it so that we have a viable consumer society? Because we're not an industrial society anymore. We're a surface economy, and how do we create consumerism to buy all the things that we produce? And so to me, when I look at it, if you want to protect capitalism, and it needs to be protected, you need to be able to rationalize the excesses that are inherent in the system. And if you say that you believe that everybody should be independent, the government shouldn't have any control, then you're asking for trouble, because then conservatives become no different than anarchists, who don't want any government intervention, and then it's every man for himself, or every man and woman, so that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at how do we solve this problem of having enough money to retire after working for 50 years? I mean, there should be some way to do this. And there's less and less opportunity. And that's why I wanted to present this today, that you can do this, but you need help, and you need to get help quickly. It can be done. You still can have.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. Listen, this has been, I mean, I learned a lot. Like I said, where were you 20 years ago? Because I needed you 20 years ago, Mel. But no, this is really terrific. I'm sure listeners and viewers learned a wealth of information, and I hope they'll take your advice and seek help and figure out a way to do this for themselves so that they can sustain themselves as they advance in years. Yes.
Yeah. When you come again, get somebody to help you, look at the numbers, look at your lifestyle choices, and make the best decision you can, but without really looking carefully at these numbers. It's a mathematical issue. Right. If you don't do this, you're just guessing.
Right.
So that's my suggestion. Really work this out and then make your decisions.
Well, thanks a lot, Mel. And on my anniversary, I'm officially beginning my second year. This is actually the first show of my second year of Senior Nation. And what a great way to start it off. So thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you, Phyllis, for having me.
Well, so now I want to turn to next week's guest. So my next week's guest is Barry Berman, who's devoted his career to building the long-term care community in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and surrounding areas by developing innovative models of care. He's been the CEO of Chelsea Jewish Life Care for 48 years, since completing his master's degree in rehabilitation administration. Barry Berman is responsible for developing the award-winning Leonard Florence Center for Living, the first urban greenhouse model nursing home in the nation. I've seen it, and it is truly something that sets itself apart from any other traditional nursing home that people probably think about. The center, which opened in February 2010, provides skilled nursing care in a home environment to the elderly and those with medical and physical disabilities. 2 of the greenhouse homes at the Leonard Florence Center were originally dedicated to those with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and MS, multiple sclerosis, the first such residences in the nation. In 2016, a 3rd specialized residence was opened for 10 additional individuals living with ALS. 2020 saw the opening of the Stein Family Center for Wellbeing, which consists of 30 private rooms for individuals who are dependent upon ventilators. Barry Berman's awards include the Leaders of Tomorrow Award from the Long-Term Living magazine for his consistent effort to make a difference in long-term care on a national level. He was presented with the Award of Honor from Leading Age for his work in expanding the world of possibilities for aging services. And most recently, Barry received the Dr. Herbert Schur Award of Honor from the Association of Jewish Aging Services, which is the highest award given by the organization. So remember to tune in, comment, and ask questions on Wednesday, April 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the SORC TVRadio Network. And until then, take care, stay well, and stay tuned.
Go for it. I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it. Discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it. Uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know. There'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's play. I can make